Chapter 9 Alexander's Bridge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. Alexander's Bridge by Willa Cather. Chapter 9. On the last Saturday in April, the New York Times published an account of the strike complications which were delaying Alexander's New Jersey bridge, and stated that the engineer himself was in town and at his office on West 10th Street. On Sunday, the day after this notice appeared, Alexander worked all day at his 10th Street rooms. His business often called him to New York, and he had kept an apartment there for years, subletting it when he went abroad for any length of time. Besides his sleeping room and bath there was a large room, formerly a painter's studio, which he used as a study and office. It was furnished with the cast-off possessions of his bachelor days, and with odd things which he sheltered for friends of his who followed itinerant and more or less artistic callings. Over the fireplace there was a large old-fashioned gilt mirror. Alexander's big work table stood in front of one of the three windows, and above the couch hung the one picture in the room, a big canvas of charming colour and spirit, a study of the Luxembourg Gardens in early spring, painted in his youth by a man who had since become a portrait painter of international renown. He had done it for Alexander when they were students together in Paris. Sunday was a cold, raw day and a fine rain fell continuously. When Alexander came back from dinner he put more wood on his fire, made himself comfortable, and settled down at his desk, where he began checking over estimate sheets. It was after 9 o'clock and he was lighting a second pipe when he thought he heard a sound at his door. He started and listened, holding the burning match in his hand. Again he heard the same sound, like a firm, light tap. He rose and crossed the room quickly. When he threw open the door he recognized the figure that shrank back into the bare, dimly lit hallway. He stood for a moment in awkward constraint, his pipe in his hand. "Come in," he said to Hilda at last, and closed the door behind her. He pointed to a chair by the fire and went back to his work table. "Won't you sit down?" He was standing behind the table, turning over a pile of blueprints nervously. The yellow light from the student's lamp fell on his hands and the purple sleeves of his velvet smoking jacket, but his flushed face and big, hard head were in the shadow. There was something about him that made Hilda wish herself at her hotel again, in the street below, anywhere but where she was. "Of course I know, Bartley," she said at last, "that after this you won't owe me the least consideration, but we sail on Tuesday. I saw that interview in the paper yesterday, telling where you were, and I thought I had to see you. That's all. Good night. I'm going now." She turned and her hand closed on the doorknob. Alexander hurried toward her, and took her gently by the arm. "Sit down, Hilda. You're wet through. Let me take off your coat. And your boots. They're oozing water." He knelt down and began to unlace her shoes, while Hilda shrank into the chair. "Here, put your feet on this stool. You don't mean to say you walked down and without overshoes?" Hilda hid her face in her hands. "I was afraid to take a cab. Can't you see, Bartley, that I'm terribly frightened?" I've been through this 100 times today. Don't be any more angry than you can help. I was all right until I knew you were in town. If you'd sent me a note, or telephoned me, or anything. But you won't let me write to you, and I had to see you after that letter, that terrible letter you wrote me when you got home." Alexander faced her, resting his arm on the mantel behind him, and began to brush the sleeve of his jacket. "Is this the way you mean to answer it, Hilda?" he asked unsteadily. She was afraid to look up at him. "Didn't you mean even to say good bye to me, Bartley? Did you mean just to quit me?" she asked. "I came to tell you that I'm willing to do as you ask me. But it's no use talking about that now. Give me my things, please." She put her hand out toward the fender. Alexander sat down on the arm of her chair. "Did you think I had forgotten you were in town, Hilda? Do you think I kept away by accident? Did you suppose I didn't know you were sailing on Tuesday? There is a letter for you there, in my desk drawer. It was to have reached you on the steamer. I was all the morning writing it. I told myself that if I were really thinking of you, and not of myself, a letter would be better than nothing. Marks on paper mean something to you." He paused. "They never did to me." Hilda smiled up at him beautifully, and put her hand on his sleeve. "Oh, Bartley, did you write to me? Why didn't you telephone me, to let me know that you had? Then I wouldn't have come." Alexander slipped his arm about her. "I didn't know it before, Hilda. On my honor, I didn't. But I believe it was because, deep down in me somewhere, I was hoping I might drive you to do just this. I've watched that door all day. I've jumped up if the fire crackled. I think I have felt that you were coming." He bent his face over her hair. "And I," she whispered. "I felt that you were feeling that. But when I came, I thought I had been mistaken." Alexander started up and began to walk up and down the room. "No, you weren't mistaken. I've been up in Canada with my bridge, and I arranged not to come to New York until after you had gone. Then, when your manager added 2 more weeks, I was already committed." He dropped upon the stool in front of her, and sat with his hands hanging between his knees. "What am I to do, Hilda?" "That's what I wanted to see you about, Bartley. I'm going to do what you asked me to do when you were in London, only I'll do it more completely. I'm going to marry." "Who?" "Oh, it doesn't matter much. One of them. Only not Mac. I'm too fond of him." Alexander moved restlessly. "Are you joking, Hilda?" "Indeed I'm not." "Then you don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I know very well. I've thought about it a great deal, and I've quite decided. I never used to understand how women did things like that, but I know now. It's because they can't be at the mercy of the man they love any longer." Alexander flushed angrily. "So it's better to be at the mercy of a man you don't love?" "Under such circumstances, infinitely." There was a flash in her eyes that made Alexander's fall. He got up and went over to the window, threw it open, and leaned out. He heard Hilda moving about behind him. When he looked over his shoulder she was lacing her boots. He went back and stood over her. "Hilda, you'd better think a while longer before you do that. I don't know what I ought to say, but I don't believe you'd be happy. Truly I don't. Aren't you trying to frighten me?" She tied the knot of the last lacing, and put her boot heel down firmly. "No, I'm telling you what I've made up my mind to do. I suppose I would better do it without telling you, but afterward I shan't have an opportunity to explain, for I shan't be seeing you again." Alexander started to speak, but caught himself. When Hilda rose he sat down on the arm of her chair and drew her back into it. "I wouldn't be so much alarmed if I didn't know how utterly reckless you can be. Don't do anything like that rashly." His face grew troubled. "You wouldn't be happy. You are not that kind of woman. I'd never have another hour's peace if I helped to make you do a thing like that." He took her face between his hands, and looked down into it. "You see, you are different, Hilda. Don't you know you are?" His voice grew softer, his touch more and more tender. "Some women can do that sort of thing, but you can love as queens did in the old time." Hilda had heard that soft, deep tone in his voice only once before. She closed her eyes, her lips and eyelids trembled. "Only one, Bartley, only one," and he threw it back at me a second time. She felt the strength leap in the arms that held her so tightly. "Try him again, Hilda. Try him once again." She looked up into his eyes, and hid her face in her hands. Chapter 9.